Hi there. Now I'm going to start building a new made up balsa wing, and the ribs that I'm going to be using in this wing are going to be symmetrical. Now that means that essentially they're the same shape on the underside as they are on the top side. So if we turn the rib upside down, it's just as good. Now it's very different when setting out a wing with this shaped rib as compared to something like this from my Tomboy Senior that's got a flat bottom. It can be a lot more tricky with a symmetrical wing rib. So when we've got a flat bottomed rib like this Tomboy Senior wing rib here, it's so much easier. We can just sit it on the spar, whatever shape that is, and we can put the trailing edge up against it, and we can just set out the ribs and get it glued, and hey presto, we've got our wing done. When we start to get a rib that isn't that shape, hasn't got a flat bottom, and I guess this is one of the extremes, a symmetrical rib, it's a lot harder to work out or to decide how is the best approach to set this out. Should we set it out like this and prop up the back? Should we lay the back of the rib onto our trailing edge and prop up the front like that and then put the spars in? Now I've done both of these different approaches in building a symmetrical wing, but I'm going to show you now how I think is the best approach. And so I thought it would be a really good thing to do a video and just show you my approach to setting this out and laying it out on the building board, because at the end of the day we want to end up with a wing that's lovely and straight and true and flies really nice. Now this is a wing that I've built a couple of times before, and on each time I've laid it out slightly differently. But this is the approach that I'm going to show you is the approach that I think is probably the easiest, the best and the most accurate for this type of wing rib. And whether you're building the same wing as me, which is for this King Combat flying wing, or whether you're building it for a pattern plane or whatever it is, it's still the same principle of how you can lay out that wing. So I thought it'd be useful because it's useful to show you, because it's the actual profile of the rib that's important in all of this, not kind of the finished product. So what I'm going to do, I've got my wing ribs here made already, and we've got the trailing edge and the spars, and I'm going to set these or get my balsa building board out, and I'll show you how I'm going to set this up. Now I'm going to be building on top of my flat balsa building board. We want something that we can pin into easily and the pins will stay in. So this board is excellent. There's a link to where I get these from in the description below this video. Now we want to check that actually it really is flat, even though it looks flat. And by putting a straight edge on like this, we can do that. And if we get down, I can actually see a little bit of light under the middle, and I can see that it's a little bit free in the middle, whereas it's rested at the edges. So there's a slight dip there. And what I'm going to do is just use some A4 sheets of paper, and I'm just going to put that under the board in the middle, and that will just lift it up, and if we need, we can add more sheets or we can take sheets out. And that I can just feel that catching now in the middle, and I can't see light under the rest of it. So I'm quite happy now that that is absolutely flat and ready to build on. Right, I've got my plans on the board now, and I've got my two main spars, and these are just long enough for the job in hand. They just project beyond the terminal ribs by about 1/4 inch. So what I'm going to do is I am going to pin this one, and I'll pin it just outside the length of the wing, the bit that we're going to cut off. Now this is quite hard balsa, so I need to just press this in with something, just to use the cap of this because I don't want to stick it in my finger. And what we're going to do now is we're going to use this ruler, and we're going to make sure that this spar is absolutely straight. The spar on the plans might look straight, but we might find that actually it's not, and it's got a little bit of a wave in it. As I said earlier with the measure, the distance between the ribs, we often find that spars that look straight aren't necessarily straight. So it's good to use a ruler, to make sure they're absolutely right. So I'll get this pinned out, I'll pin it between the ribs, and then we'll have a look at the next stage. Right, well that's pinned down nice and straight now. So we're just going to start to put on some of the ribs. Now these are symmetrical ribs, but they've all got an arrow on them showing which way is up. Now, I know I said earlier that they could be that way or that way, but we'll keep them all in the same orientation. And by putting an arrow on, we know which orientation is that is. It doesn't really matter whether we put the arrow down or up, as long as they're all the same. We've got some slightly thicker ribs that go on the outside edge, and we've got some thicker ones that go here, and we've got these ones that are thinner, 1/16, that I've lightened, and there's a video, if you look in the description below this, just showing how I lighten these. It won't make a lot of difference to this wing, but it was more about the process and the technique. So we'll put those to one side for the moment, and we'll put the thicker one here and another thicker one there. Now the way we're going to do this wing and set it out is we are going to set it out so that the spars are vertical above each other, so they are square. And what we can do is we can use our square blocks, or we could use a small set square to check that we get that right. Now I'm only going to set this up at the moment with these 4 ribs just to make sure that it's right. So we'll set that up like that, and we can see from this that actually the tip wants to come down just a fraction to get that right. And if we use blocks aren't essential, but if we use blocks, that will help us hold them in place. Like I say, we can use a set square. So if I put those in place, now this top spar is going to come off in a bit, and I still need to check the spacing of the ribs. We're doing this process just because we need to set out this back edge and how we're going to support the back of the ribs and put on the trailing edge. Now I've got these weights here which are just keeping the plans flat at the moment. Now I've got a piece of thick hard balsa here which I've just wrapped in like a sandwich kind of wrap, and just to stop the CA from sticking to it. And this is 3/8, 10mm. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to slide that under the back edge, and just catching there. I'm going to slide that under the back edge, and I've got my trailing edge sheet which needs to go under the ribs. And I'm going to look in my scrap box now, and I am going to find some bits of balsa, scrap balsa, so that we can pack under the back edge of this. And essentially what we're doing is we're lifting up this sheet of balsa and getting it at the right distance and the right angle so that the ribs are just touching the trailing edge. So it's a little bit of a fiddle just to get it right, and we'll need to move this in a little bit. So I will get this set up and get it packed with balsa, and then we'll have a look at what we've done. But you can see it's almost there now, just needs the angle altering a little bit there and a little bit here. But once we've got this done, we'll zoom in and we'll have a look. Right, well, you can see now we've got this piece of 1/16 sheeting that the ribs sit down onto at just the right angle for these ribs to sit really nice on there. There's no gap, it's just perfect. We've got a little bit of overlap here of the sheeting because when we put the piece on top, we need that so that these come together nicely. If if the sheeting finished at the end of the rib, then you'd have a little bit of a gap and it wouldn't look quite so nice. So that there is perfect for that rib. Now if we look at this one, hopefully you can see there's a little bit of a lift on it. Now if I just zoom in so you can see that better. So we've just got a little bit of movement there, it's just lifted off. Now the reason that that's right isn't because this board isn't right. If we look at our set square, we can see that this spar is just slightly forward. So if we actually put it correctly using the set square, we can see the end of that just come down and press onto that board. So the problem is here, and just holding that right so that it comes down, and that could be caused by just a very slight bit of bend in these spars, but once we've got it glued that will be fine. And that's the beauty of having blocks like these, because we can use the blocks instead of the set square to hold it nice and secure, and you can see now that is just right. Right, so we've got the trailing edge now pinned down onto this board at the right angle, the right height, to support all the ribs when the two main spars are vertical and perpendicular to the board, so nice and square. Now the next thing that we need to do is we need to take out this top spar, and we need to put in all of the ribs. And for the moment I'm going to put the ribs, still ensuring that the arrows are upright so we get them in the order or the orientation in which they were made, and I'm going to start putting these on over the plans. I know there is some discrepancy in the plans, in the measurements, but we'll deal with that in just a little while. Let's just get them on together first, and then we can measure them and make sure it's right. So I will get all these ribs fitted and I will get that spar back on. Right, well, I've now got all of the ribs in, and they're all a little bit higgledy-piggledy. They're not exactly upright or in the right location, but we've got a good starting point now. And what we're going to do is we're going to work first on getting these end ribs glued in, and then we can work our way in, making sure that they're in the right place and square, upright. And I've got these steel blocks which I'm using again to pinch the two spars to make sure they stay perpendicular to the board. Now these, I just cut these from a steel rod and sprayed them. That's where I got them. I didn't buy them, I just made them. And it's easy done. Hardest bit is getting them cut, and I actually got somebody to mill the ends nice and square, so I just made these myself. So what we're going to do is, like I say, we're going to work on the end ribs first, and we'll just move these blocks to allow us to get in with our set square. And we need to make sure that the rib is not only square to the strut, so it's coming back nice and straight. I'll just move the camera a little bit. So yeah, we want to make sure that it's nice and square in relation to the strut, but we also want to make sure that it's actually perpendicular to the board, so it's square that way as well. And we can use a small set square. Alternatively, I could use the blocks. So I could take these blocks from down the other end and just put those in like that, and get another one and put that in like that. And now I know that that is spot on. Because these blocks are square, I know that angle is a right angle, that angle is a right angle, so it's square coming back, it's square to the table. So what I'm going to do now is glue this with some CA. I'm going to do all this wing with CA, and I'm just going to hold that down, careful not to move it either way, and a dab of CA. I'll just put a little bit for the moment. Now this is a terminal rib, and there's a terminal rib at the other end, because what we have to remember, well, that didn't stick, What we have to remember is this is a flying wing, so this is the entirety of the wing. If you're making two wings for a conventional aeroplane, you may want to leave this root rib unstuck, or you may want to set it at an angle, depending on what's happening with your dihedral and how you're going to join them together. But I'm just treating this as it's got two ends identical, so I don't need to join this to another wing. Okay, now we've stuck that and we've got this nice and square. We're going to put on a dab of CA, and we just need to make sure here that these ribs are sat down on that spar properly and they're not lifting up, which it is, so that's ideal. So I will just glue this, just a dab of CA, and I will go around and CA everything again once I've done it. I'm just tacking them at the moment. And now I've got that rib nice and set, square, exactly where I want it, above the line on the plans. And I'm going to go to the other end now and do the same. Right, well now we've got these two end ribs fixed, glued in place, and we know that this is a nice square frame. So we've got the foundation of a good wing. It's worth saying that I've just got a little bit of plastic under where I'm going to glue, just so that when I glue the balsa, I'm not gluing it to my paper plans and ruining the plans, because you never know, we may build another one. Now it's worth also just using a straight edge and just making sure that this is nice and square and it just looks right. Even though it should be, because we've set it up right, we just need to make sure with a ruler, and that looks lovely. And we can eye it up from that end just to make sure it looks right as well. But I'm confident this is nice now, and it needs to be in the position we want it in a relaxed way. We don't want to be putting weights on top of the ribs to force them down, because as soon as we glue everything, take it off the board, it's going to end up starting to twist and there's going to be tension in the wing. We don't want any tension in this wing. We want nice fitting joints, but we want it to be relaxed as well, so we're not forcing it. So we'll start to glue the ribs now, and we'll work from the outside going in, and we'll start on this one. So we've got these two blocks here which we can use to make sure that we're getting this wing rib nice and square. Now we could be using a set square like this to make sure we've got it upright and to make sure we've got it square to the spars. But I quite like using these blocks. I find this quite a useful way to work, because we can just leave that now. With a set square you'd need to hold it. Now earlier I said it was 110 roughly from that end, and that rib is directly over the drawing, I think. Yeah, and it looks to me like 109.5, which is close enough. So we'll go 109.5 and we'll do the same that end. So that is looking good. First thing I'm going to do, I know this is square because of my blocks, I'm going to glue down this trailing edge. Or I'm going to glue the rib down onto this trailing edge. And I'm just going to hold it in place. Right, well now I've got that glued, I'm going to glue the spars. So I'm just going to slide my blocks back one at a time, making sure I don't move the position of the rib. I can take that one away, and just going to put a bit of CA on these joints. I will probably go around these joints and CA them again when I finish doing this. Okay, so now we've got that one done. We know that was 109.5 mil, and I'm going to do exactly the same with this rib and get that the same. And then I'm just going to work my way in and do exactly the same process. Block it up, make sure it's square, measure it, glue it, and do that one, and make sure we end up with two identical sides. So I'll get that done now. I'm doing these central ribs now, and it's worth just noting that I've been checking the measurements, so 109.5, and that was 109.5. And now where I'm coming to this central portion of the wing, because we've got a radio bay here, and we want to make sure this is symmetrical, I'm actually measuring it from the terminal rib like that, and again like that, just to make sure that we haven't had any creep in just a little bit extra there and there. So to make sure that these are the same distance from the terminal rib to these bay ribs, which it is. So I'm going to glue that now. And then we've got these additional ribs here, which in actual fact they are so close together because they are supporting a fin like this that just slots between them. On the plan it shows them being a distance apart, maybe half an inch apart, but actually I'm going to put them a lot close together so this is a snug fit. But that's just a variation I'm doing. So just thought I'd mention about measuring from end to end. So I'll get these glued now. Right, we've got all the hard work done now. We've just got a couple of jobs left to do before we take this wing off the board. And the first, we're going to put in the leading edge. Now, if we get down at this end and we eye up all those bird mouths looking along the line, it's a beautiful sight. They're all really nicely lined up, so it's going to make this job really quite easy. And all we need to do is make sure we've got enough overhang at each end, and then I'm going to start in the middle, and I'm just going to hold that there and CA it, and then once that is set, I will make sure that the ribs are square and CA that one, because we don't want to move the front of the ribs across in any way. So that's looking good, looking square to me, and we just take these off. Yes, that's looking lovely. So now just going to pull this in and glue this one, and I'm going to work my way along the line, just making sure that we get the front of that nice and square. And the final job we've got to do now is we've just got this trailing edge to glue into place. So I'm just putting it on top, making sure it's lined up, and I'm just going to CA on top of the ribs here, and this will run down the inside. But once we've got it off the building board, we will make sure that it's glued properly. So we'll just go along on top of each rib, these two ribs, and I will also run along this back edge here where the two trailing edges meet together. Doing this just gives it a little bit more rigidity for when we take it off the board. To be honest, it would probably be fine to take it off the board without, but if we do this, it just makes it that little bit more strong, rigid. So you can see now I'm just going along and just tacking this back edge into place, but it will need gluing properly once it comes off the board. Okay, so now is the moment of truth. We've got this all glued up and we're going to take it off the board and see what it looks like. So we'll get the weights off and we'll get the pins out, and it's at this point we hold our breath and think, have we got something straight and true, or have we got a banana? I'm sure it'll be fine. So let's get the pins out, one more, and then we're done. Right, so that's the last pin out, and we just need to lift this off, and there we go. And now, oh, that's nice. So we can, if I can line that up with the camera, I've still got the little bits of plastic on it, get rid of those. If I can line that up with the camera, hopefully you can see that spar is lovely and straight, and the leading edge is lovely and straight, and so is the trailing edge as well. So that is nice to get off the building board, and I'm really pleased, because these symmetrical wings can be a little bit tricky if you don't set them out just right, and I'm quite pleased with this technique of propping it up at the back. It seems to work really well, and we've got our ribs together here to allow our fins to just slot in, as I said. So there we go, that's how they will go. You know, it doesn't matter how many wings you build, it is always such a relief to get your wing off the board and see it lovely and straight and true. Now there's obviously still quite a lot to do before this is a functioning wing. We've got to trim the edges, we're going to put a bit of sheeting on, quite a few other little jobs. But essentially we've got the skeleton done, we've managed to support it, set it out so we get that lovely straight true wing. So I hope you found this video useful, and don't feel daunted by the task of setting out these kind of symmetrical wings where it's just a little bit trickier than those flat bottom ones. So anyway, thanks very much for watching.